Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 55th audio file in the audiocast series known as the Q News Patriot. I am the Q News Patriot. My name is SGAnon. I know it's been a little while since we've gotten together on air again in this fashion. My apologies for that. Things have been pretty darn busy on this end, and they've also been very busy out there in the world, right? It's becoming sort of difficult to isolate different directionalities for research because we have so many webs of the awakening that are beginning to coalesce in the public space. We've just seen Sound of Freedom out early July, July 4th, right? We've talked about this topic of child trafficking and child sex trafficking coming to the forefront for a while. We've got things popping off with the Biden government, both quietly behind the scenes and also overtly, very much demonstrating, to the American population, even the layman out there, that this administration is not simply incompetent, is not simply stupid, but there must be a greater agenda at play because it's very outright callous behavior towards the interests of the peoples of the United States, to the point where you can only conclude that there is no regard for those interests. So all of these things, happening all around the world, and then back here at home, my little one, and spending some extra time with him, and we're getting ready to transition to his first official year at the elementary school level, if we want to call it that. Things have been busy. But I'm glad to be back with you. We have a lot to talk about today. I'm going to try and condense it as best I can. There's just so much happening. I mean, this is the most exciting time to be alive. We have everything from internal Russian operations now to identify and destroy traitors, to Xi telling the Chinese military to move into active conflict planning and preparation. We have a cyber crisis that is continuing to grow. We have a cyber war that is becoming overt in some respects. News articles online discussing critical infrastructure, Defense Department systems in multiple nations, governmental agencies, academic institutions, all of these things sort of being targeted in this worldwide back and forth that we're witnessing in the digital space. We have BRICS preparing to meet in August of this year, and it is my belief, and we'll get into that here in this file, that they are going to announce a new gold-backed currency system, that it's going to be a digital and tangible real-world system. In other words, we are about to witness what I believe to be the birthing pang, the crowning, if we will, of the quantum way of life coming into the asset-backed financial space. This is revolutionary. This is going to be world-changing, and there's some symbolism behind this meeting that's coming up towards the end of August. I believe it's August 20th. I'd have to double check that. Don't quote me. But there is some sort of symbolism about that we'll get into. I think it's very important. We're witnessing everything from nuclear events being staged to banking systems being prepared for crumbling. The child sex trafficking coming to the forefront, like we were just talking about a moment ago. Massive amounts of military movement. Recently tracked a number of very interesting call signs across the air. Q-tip was one of them. Evil, EV1L was one of them. So we're sort of seeing things coming into the forefront. We've had some very interesting posts by Scavino. It's just an exciting time to be alive. So all of that being said, I don't just want to splatter shotgun material at you, if you will, and throw paint on the wall. Let's go ahead and sort of isolate the issues. We'll talk about them a little bit, and then I will plan on hopping off and seeing you all next time. The first thing I'd like to highlight is that United States continuity of government operations are continuing with, I think, imminent success, and they are actually being used at this time to disempower NATO and set NATO up for a failure to start, a failure to respond, if we will. Right now, there's a movement that's going on. There's sort of a vying for endorsements in the alliance of who's going to be the next NATO Secretary General. Right now, we have Mr. Stoltenberg, who is sort of a more conservative personality, has talked about, wanting to support Ukraine, but has also taken sort of a middle of the road approach, not really willing to go out there and foment war at a high level, right? But we're now seeing an announcement from Mr. Stoltenberg in these last few weeks, that there will be a retirement come September. Interesting symbolism there, right? And that someone else will have to step into the Secretary General role. The Secretary General for NATO would be one of those individuals that would help execute response planning, alliance discussions back and forth, militarily, diplomatically, preparation for things. So it's an important position. An article from the Daily Mail just a few days ago, conservatives warn that Miss von der Leyen was the worst ever German defense minister. Now, Miss von der Leyen is the lady that is currently being promoted by the Biden administration, but really being spearheaded, supported very strongly by the Biden administration to be the next Secretary General of NATO. Conservatives had described her as the worst ever German defense minister before she became commission president. She's the EU commission president. On her watch, Berlin, Germany's troops notoriously trained with broomsticks during NATO exercises because the Germans did not have enough rifles to bring to the trainings. Former Minister David Jones urged Rishi Sunak of London to block the move. He should certainly not be anxious to support her, telling the Telegraph. The worry is that the EU is pursuing permanent structured cooperation, which is detracting from the integrity of NATO, and Ms. von der Leyen has been a keen proponent of it. So in other words, Ms. von der Leyen is the perfect individual to have in a Secretary General position of this particular bloc of nations if a real world kinetic threat to the Khazarian mafia's hegemony and power structure there in that area of the world actually existed. And of course, we know that it does. We know that Russia has been pursuing itself economically, industrially, militarily, diplomatically, financially, all throughout these last 3 to 5 years, and has absolutely come out sort of at the head of the bear, if we will. Their economy is booming in ways that it's not boomed in quite a long time. We're seeing record amounts of profits from US-based companies over there in the Russian economy, doing lots of business there in that area of the world. The cost of living is way down compared to wages. The Russian economy is very strong. The Russian industry is sort of ratcheting back up to what it was about a half century ago. And so Russia presents a very apparent and very real threat to the hegemony of NATO. And of course, we know that individuals in the Russian government have already discussed publicly the idea that some of the NATO states, the Baltic states in particular, but also the Ukrainian, countryside, and I believe the southeastern areas of Poland as well, they've been discussed publicly as sort of being ancestrally Russia's by heritage and by tradition. So as we go through the process of returning territories, we have competing factions in all different areas, and we're also dealing with MK Ultra mind control on the ground. So this is a very sensitive sort of balancing act that has to be achieved here. And someone in the position of Secretary General in NATO who is not capable of providing an able-bodied force, an equipped fighting force, an adequate response measure, planning, things of that nature, that's the perfect individual if you're wishing to sort of sabotage the deep state war machine from within. And I believe that's exactly what we have occurring here. And I'm very heartened by that and encouraged by that. Now, this at the same time, just in the last few days, that President Xi has publicly told the Chinese military to go ahead and begin for active conflict planning and establishing secure logistical and critical functionality areas and checkpoints. Where we've been witnessing for a while now in the Chinese area of the world, lots of interoperational drills between the Russians and the Chinese. We've witnessed it with the Indonesians and the Chinese, the Vietnamese and the Chinese. I believe North Korea is likely involved in some of China's military planning as well, though we can't confirm that overtly right now in the public sphere. But it's extremely likely given the connections there and certainly the relationships that were broached while President Trump was still in office. So as we're witnessing this rhetoric from President Xi, and just recently him stating that it's essential to the future and destiny of mankind that the United States and its peoples learn to live properly together. As a matter of fact, President Xi said the future and destiny depends on whether or not we in the United States and the Chinese peoples can learn to live together properly and peaceably. All of this coming out rhetoric-wise tells me that we're experiencing, or we're preparing to experience, a massive movement of events in the world that will sort of shock the world and shock the consciousness. If we look at this journey that we've had longitudinally throughout this period of time since 2016, we can draw a number of parallels, and President Trump has oftentimes drawn a number of parallels from the current times back to the first two world wars, 9/11 and the John F. Kennedy days, the space race, the Cuban Missile Crisis, things of this nature. We have witnessed President Trump discussing COVID-19, for example, as being worse than Pearl Harbor, worse than 9/11, drawing direct comparisons to times in American history where extremely large acts of war were committed directly against the United States. Symbolically, I think that we still have more to go in that area. Along this way, what are we missing as far as the scare events, right? Let's use some vertical logic and sort of hypothesize just for a moment. We're missing a Cuban Missile Crisis style situation. We are missing a Pearl Harbor style situation, right? Overtly, anyway. Excuse me. We are missing a crash of 29 style situation or something of that equivalent severity happening in the financial space around the world. So these are things that we know, and we're missing a 9/11 publicly. So these are things that we know would be very likely to be deep state playbook cards that would get played at those desperation points. These cards have been used at different points along the way to completely redirect the direction of the nation. It got us into a world war in the 1940s. It caused a sort of a neutering of the Kennedy administration by the military industrial complex in the 1960s. 9/11 2001 spawned off more than 20 years when we factor it in of conflict around the world that did not have to happen, right? So these are often world changing and policy changing events for nations. And if we assume for a moment that there is a back and forth happening with the white hat, black hat alliances, if you will, these forces of good and evil that we can see battling in the digital space and in the economic space and in the business space and even in the kinetic space to some regards, then we have to conclude that the other side, that we're draining the other side of their cards and their ability to play, right? And so we've sort of witnessed that with Russia already. Russia has been taking its sweet time in this military operation in Europe to drain NATO of their ability, of their equipment, of their resources that they've hidden back, right? And they have only been taking this entire time to step things up at home, knowing that a second phase, which President Putin has publicly talked about, is inevitable and will be coming. Excuse me. So as we look at how all of this sort of ties together, I think that we can expect to have those final cards played anytime. I think that we've been talking about things like false flags, Pearl Harbors, these sorts of ilk for a while. We've certainly talked about the biological terrorism coming to the forefront. We've talked about the agenda with the child sex trafficking coming to the forefront that we know is occurring. Sound of Freedom is breaking box office records right now. It went straight to the top on the July 4th release day. It outshined Disney's Indiana Jones series by a number of millions of dollars just on the first day alone. More than 2 million tickets were already achieved. So we're talking about 4 days out from the initial launch. And I think that there were about 500,000 to 600,000 that were purchased ahead of time. Those numbers might be wrong. I'm just sort of drawing from the things that I read. So we're accelerating in a period where our enemies don't have a lot of choice left. They really can't continue to hide, right? We have control of too many critical areas of the game board. Nothing can stop what is coming because the game board is sort of orchestrated in a way to force out the last of the cockroaches, whether they wish to be or not. That's one of the reasons we're seeing a radioactive event being prepared and planned, certainly in Europe by the Ukrainian special services, along with NATO special services such as MI6 and CIA. But we're also witnessing a similar style event being prepared for the Pacific theater in those regions. I believe it's likely that that nuclear scare from the Pacific side comes from North Korea or a combination of North Korea and some of the other islands in that area of the world. We've witnessed missile defense systems being moved around in the U.S. homeland in the last 2 weeks. I think that we can make a reasonable conclusion that if there are a lot of military aged men, and I believe that there are, coming in through the southern border, many of them associated with the People's Liberation Army, that we might expect an on our soil Pearl Harbor event. I do not know what that would look like, but it would certainly give justification for the military to intervene immediately at the local community level and institute a form of soft martial law for protection, right, for handling the crisis situation. I think that such a crisis could very easily be tied back to Joe Biden setting us up on purpose for something like that to occur. It could tie in with the United Nations and some sort of emergency power seizure as well. So we really don't know how these things may play out, but we can be confident, I think, that with the symbolism at play, there are some great events that are sort of in store for us. I say great, not necessarily in the good sense, but in the large sense. that are in store for us that we have not seen yet, but that may provide the exact context and the justification to begin the process that so many awakened patriots and Anons out there have wanted for a long time. We know President Trump is the commander-in-chief. We've seen it in the documentation. We've seen it in the optics. We've seen it in the public space. We've seen it presented to us. We've seen it presented literally by Dan Scavino. Just here in a moment, we're going to share a couple of videos, or I'm going to share my screen with you all so that you can see a couple of videos. One of those videos, President Trump is very clearly being called, you're the president. You know, we know that you're the president. And Mr. Trump responds, Roger, Roger, or something along those lines. And so it's sort of an innocuous response, but it's not a repulsion of that statement. It's not a repudiation of what's happening. And so these are important counterintelligence traits that occur in the narrative warfare space that are clues and tips and are worthy of our consideration as we go through the process, because it helps us to paint the picture of what's really happening in the world. Excuse me. I apologize. I've had a cough lately. It's got a tickle going on my end, and I'm having a little bit of trouble here. So pause just a moment. I'm going to grab some water. I'll be right back with you. My apologies about that. So here we go. Let's go ahead and come over here. We're going to go through some recent articles that I've combed out of the internet over these last few days. And we're going to discuss their implications for exactly the pretext that we were just talking about a moment ago. Sort of give ourselves a little bit of specificity on things that are happening in the world. Published on telecomtechnews.com, July 3rd. Hackers force Russian military satellite operator offline. A group of unidentified hackers has taken credit for targeting prominent Russian satellite communications operator Dozor Teleport. The network disruption caused by the cyber attack impacted critical services utilized by energy companies, as well as the country's defense and security services. The attack was perpetrated by an organization claiming to be affiliated with the Wagner Group, a group of mercenaries financed by the Russian military that staged a coup last month before its commander, Yevgeny Prigozhin, called it off and fled to Belarus. Despite the hacker group's claims of affiliation with Wagner, doubts have emerged regarding the authenticity. The absence of any mention of the attack on the Wagner's official Telegram channel adds to the skepticism. Whether the group's affiliation claims are real or not, the impact of their work certainly is. Do you see how genius this is? Russia needed a reason to move things around the game board. We needed soft martial law in the country, and we needed a reason and a justification to begin internal identification and destroying operations, specifically of espionage and sabotage assets, what we would also call traitors. When Wagner staged a public coup that was less than 72 hours from start to finish, we witnessed a number of loyalty highlights happen across the entire Russian political and demographic spectrum. We watched law enforcement in key areas resist Wagner, and we watched law enforcement in key areas lay their arms down to them. Same thing with governors. Same thing with Russian military personnel. We also moved most of the Wagner group from the central eastern portions of Ukraine all of the way around the game board to southern Belarus, within 100 kilometers of the capital, Kiev. We also had justification at that point to move a tremendous amount of Wagner assets into the western portions of the Belarusian countryside to prevent NATO sabotage assets from infiltrating the country and causing a color revolution or a change in government, which, if we remember from several months back, was a concern on behalf of President Lukashenko that he expressed to President Putin in the course of this special military operation. And now we are witnessing a cyber group that is claiming to be affiliated with, so probably financed by, or at the very least equipped by, the Wagner mercenary group, which is a voraciously loyal Russian paramilitary mercenary group. And these cyber actors, I should say, are claiming that they have affiliation with this group and that they are attacking internal Russian critical infrastructure, energetic infrastructure, defense and security services, etc. What better way to get information about who is taking under the table deals, who is selling out their nation quietly, who is covertly blackmailed and captured, whether they want to be or not, what a better way to achieve, or excuse me, what better way to achieve that than by all of the events we've witnessed with the Wagner Group through to this point? This is irregular warfare. This is counterintelligence at its highest. This is exceptionally well done planning. We had an excuse for soft martial law in the country. Putin has not dictatorially grabbed powers like everyone has made it out to be, right? The Duma has not been disbanded. There is still a voice of the people within Russia. It's a constitutional republic that's leveraging its emergency powers in the same fashion that our continuity of government operation over here across the pond is now sabotaging NATO from a strategic planning and a capabilities perspective, which of course is the highest level. It doesn't matter how much equipment you have if the planning and the logistics and the strategy design are lacking or are subpar, right? They're mediocre. It doesn't matter how good of things that you might have or not have access to. And to add to that difficulty with what's happened with COG and with COG in many different NATO nations, access to the WMD arsenal outside of hidden intelligence services technology, which has been part of the reason we've had to drag this out in this way. Access to that WMD technology is not possible, right? As a matter of fact, over here in the United States, a news report just recently, mentioned that the last of our GB nerve agent missiles are currently being destroyed by the United States Army's Chemical and Biological Warfare divisions. Those missiles would absolutely be in play if we had the deep state actors in control of the initiative spaces around the world. So we know in some capacity that their ability to pull the levers on the really big stuff has been limited. It may not have been completely removed, but as we've drawn this process out, the only things they had access to of that caliber were things like their big warfare weapons like HARP and others like that, earthquake weapons, climate weapons, that have always been hidden in different pockets around the world, and now they've come out into the light and we've destroyed a lot of them. So this thing with Wagner and what happened with Russia is just a microscopic, a microcosmic, really is a better way to put it, example of what is going on in different theaters around the world, playing out by the conditions in those theaters where it has to happen in order to satisfy all of the operational goals. It's truly the most coordinated event that we've ever lived through. And to showcase that, we can see the cyber war happening back and forth. An article also from July 3rd, same day that article that we just read came out, unsolicited smartwatches were mailed to U.S. military personnel, raising security concerns. Excuse me. The U.S. Department of the Army Criminal Investigation Division has warned about unsolicited smartwatches which were mailed to service members by unknown senders. The Army CID highlighted the cybersecurity risks that are posed by peculiar smartwatches, urging service members to avoid interacting with them. Location-enabled smart devices and apps have leaked military personnel's location and sensitive data in the past, prompting restriction in protected areas. The Army CID has warned service members against powering on the smartwatches that auto-connect to Wi-Fi and will immediately pair with cell phones unprompted, potentially accessing a myriad of user data. Smartwatches could also contain malware that would grant the sender access to saved data, including banking information, contacts, and account information such as usernames and passwords. They can also gain access to the device's audio and camera capabilities, allowing threat actors to access real-time conversations. Isn't this incredible? Either way, the criminal investigative body has warned that the dubious smartwatches posed significant security risks to the recipients and to the U.S. military. So if you're trying to get information, what better way to do that? Right? This is the same sort of publisher's clearinghouse tactic. Mail someone a check, they sign it, they send it back. Now they're on the hook for $2,500. They didn't know they had to pay it back, right? It's sort of the same tactic that we're seeing. To add to the cyber war, on July the 6th, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency and partners released a joint cybersecurity advisory on newly identified TrueBot malware. CISA, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity released a joint advisory titled Increased TrueBot Activity Infects U.S. and Canada-Based Networks to help organizations detect and protect against newly identified malware variants. Based on confirmation from open source reporting and analytical findings of TrueBot variants, The four organizations assessed cyber threat actors leveraged the malware through phishing campaigns containing malicious redirect hyperlinks. You get down here. Additionally, newer versions of TrueBot can allow malicious actors to gain access by exploiting a known vulnerability with NetRick's auditor application, and then it gives an application number. As recently as May 2023, cyber threat actors used this vulnerability to deliver TrueBot malware variants and collect and exfiltrate information against organizations in the USA and in Canada. That is absolutely incredible. We're witnessing in real time a cyber invasion that we discussed on our last file is likely going to result in the closing of the gates, right? The turning off of the system to prevent the collection of anything more that cannot be lost. Now, we say cannot be lost, and Q also says we have it all. I think it's worth noting that military intelligence agencies throughout the world have Patriot actors within them in certain areas that do, I believe, have most or all of the criminality recorded on record. It's likely that these agencies would have been monitoring this information for the past several decades as the threat actors in the world, it continued to ratchet up the stakes and increase the threats that were offered, to mankind, albeit quietly. So as now we're witnessing this sort of back and forth happening, I think that there's a tremendous amount of information supporting details, specific descriptions versus just metadata, for example, that is being garnered and captured by both sides, primarily, I think, by what I would call the white hat side, just based on the patterns of how these things seem to be planning out. And what better way to turn off more access than to just turn the whole thing off, right? If we come over here, also on July the 6th, we had a cybersecurity advisory and ICS advisory. Let me see here. PyGab M bus with an alert code ICSA 23 18701. 187. What is police code 187? Risk evaluation, successful exploitation of these vulnerabilities, which include code injection, unprotected transport of credentials, use of hard-coded credentials, weak password requirements, cross-site request forgery, could allow an attacker to inject arbitrary commands, steal passwords, or trick valid users into executing malicious commands threatening the entire system. So this is a form of technology that's used quite a bit in government agencies, and it's directly under attack. And over here, give me just a moment here. Let's get this pulled up. All right, we're going to switch gears. We're going to highlight a little bit more about what's happening in the world of child sex trafficking and the operations to bring that to the forefront. Sound of Freedom, we already know. We talked about it a little bit earlier. An incredible, incredible film. I believe that's coming to Twitter in some form or fashion fairly soon. Capability to share that production far and wide. It's already being actively down-talked by the U.S. media. The Guardian wasted no time in labeling it QAnon, and that's beautiful. It's an absolutely wonderful fact that they're continuing with the same pre-planned, the same unoriginal narrative, the same parrot speak, the look here, not there sort of discussion, because now we have gone through a period of time where at one point, the media had credibility still and labeled QAnon as a dangerous conspiracy cult. And now the media's credibility at this point in this process to date is the lowest that it has ever been in all of our recorded history. And so to continue doing the exact same thing that you were doing when you had credibility, and you have since been shown out to not have credibility, shows that you are continuing in the lie, and the credibility is destroyed even that much more. It also highlights the fact that most people did not realize what Q was actually about. Q was about protecting and saving children from ritualized abuse and satanic trafficking. Q is about eliminating the human trafficking enterprise that exists around the entire world, which almost all decent people across all political ideologies can get behind both of those. And so by continuing to label this movie QAnon, as people are going and seeing it with their own eyes, and they're seeing that there's nothing Q or weird or cultish about this movie or about this topic, and the topic is in fact very real and very plausible, it just destroys the credibility that much more. They are hanging themselves to the point of no return. And by the end of this process, there will not be trust of any kind left in any major media outlet. We are fundamentally changing how information is shared in the world. I fully predict that many of these outlets will go completely out of business and just become titular references to history, and then others will be purchased again and rebranded or reformed in some fashion, and many of them will probably be renamed. So recently, the Daily Mail put out an article, July the 5th, 2023. Smallville actor Allison Mack is quietly released from prison a year early after being jailed for 3 years for brainwashing and recruiting sex slaves for the NXIVM cult leader Keith Raniere, who is serving 120 years in prison. If we come over here to the Q boards, Q discussed Allison Mack a couple of different times. The first time was drop 1368. Allison Mack, NXIVM in brackets, arrested, ? When does a bird sing? Schneiderman resigns, ? Coincidence? Eyes wide open. Who will be next? Watch New York City, watch California. That was in May of 2018. In March of 2019, Q posts in drop 3156, Ray Chandler equals Allison Mack times 100. Ray Chandler, of course, we know is an associated child handler for the big time elites, the Clintons, the Epsteins, all of those, right? Come over here to July of 2019, so 4 months later, drop 3417. Q references some initial drops discussing Allison Mack. Drop 1203, which is not included here right now. Drop 1203, Allison Mack of NXIVM sex cult naming big names. Mack is naming names. Big names in Hollywood, government, local, and federal. Proof, the Standard Hotel. Of course, we know that Adam's Shifty Shift and what occurred at the Standard Hotel is sort of indicative and reminiscent of what occurred many different times in many different areas, including the Standard Hotel, by other individuals. So Q says in this drop, how does LDR Rothschilds connect to the Bronfmans? Find the bridge. Think company. How is Bronfman connected to NXIVM? Go backwards. NXIVM, who pled guilty? And then it references the article from Claire Bronfman in the NXIVM cult. Allison Mack, when does a bird sing? All capitalized. Watch New York City. News unlocks. 5 by 5, meaning clear, good to go. Then Q references that drop in the very next drop. I believe it's the very next drop. Let me make sure. Yes, 3418. What city was Epstein arrested in? New York City. 5 by 5. Watch California. Now, Q told us to watch California in that first drop by Mac in 2018. So as I come back to this article in 2023, Smallville actor Allison Mack released from prison a year early after being jailed for brainwashing and recruiting sex slaves for NXIVM. Now I have a whole new understanding of what's going on militarily, what's going on in the shadow agency operative spaces. Allison Mack, 40, was released from federal prison near San Francisco this week. Watch California, right? Included in those drops. Imprisoned in San Francisco, arrested in New York. Same thing with Epstein, except Epstein wasn't imprisoned in California, right? He was arrested in New York. The Smallville actress avoided a longer prison term by cooperating with authorities. Excuse me. Mack, who began serving a 3-year sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California in September of 2021, was released on Monday, according to federal prison records. Best known for her role as a young Superman's close friend on Smallville, Allison Mack, who is 40, pled guilty in 2019 to charges that she manipulated women into becoming sex slaves for NXIVM leader Keith Raniere. She avoided a longer prison term by cooperating with federal authorities in their case against Raniere, who was sentenced to 120 years in prison after being convicted on charges of sex trafficking. When does a bird sing? When it's caged. And that's exactly what we have going on right now. We're witnessing this plan, this process, this coordination play out across all of the important and critical areas of society, right? We're witnessing the subjugation of the military industrial complex. We're witnessing the exposure of the hidden intelligence community and all of the personnel, assets, and equipment that includes. We're witnessing the reshaping and the restructuring of the financial system, right? We're witnessing the reshaping and restructuring of the DOJ and how we understand and apply things like the rule of law around the world. We're witnessing the turnover of the spiritual and religious space as people are not only discovering that their institutions have been involved in evil at the top level, but they're also going on the spiritual journey of their own volition for their own destiny, and they're reconnecting with their creative source, which is the most important thing I think that comes out of this entire journey, period. Our connection to our spiritual person, our spiritual identity, our spiritual capabilities, our spiritual mind. We have a much more fully possible let me just say a body and a mind that when it's filled with that Holy Spirit is much more fully realized and is much more vital and full of life and capable when we have that deep intimate connection that feels real and personal every day, that there doesn't feel like there's a space between, right? We've lived in a world that has held us apart from that. And I don't think that it's fair that we live that way any longer. And I think at the end of the day, that is the most important component. We prevent evil from ever resurfacing by changing our spiritual associations with, I shouldn't say spiritual associations. That's not the right word. By closing the gap between who we have allowed ourselves to be separated, out from, right? We've individualized ourselves apart from God and apart from one another. And so by closing that gap, getting closer to God, we get closer to one another in the process, and we are able to prevent things like evil and corruption from being not only accepted, but even needed, right? Even wanted, even seen as a vessel by which to gain a certain end, because it would simply be easier to do this in a love-based, compassion-based, spirit-filled way, right? So that being said, let's talk a little bit about the financial system and the crash that's being finalized and implemented. Let's pull up a couple of articles here. All right, so all of the way back in January of this year, so this is how long this has been planned. An article was published by the Business Standard stating that the 15th BRICS Summit would be held later this year in Durban in August of 2023, Durban, South Africa. Durban is a township that's on the outskirts sort of the Johannesburg area. The 15th BRICS Summit is all set to take place in South Africa's Durban in late August of this year. The foreign ministers of Brazil, Russia, India, China met for the first time on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in 2006, kicking off BRICS cooperation. 2006. Later, in April 2011, South Africa participated for the first time in the third BRICS summit held in Sanya, China. The announcement was apparently made recently by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov at a joint news conference with, Foreign Minister of the State Eritrea Osman in Massawa, Eritrea on January 2026. I'm getting ahead of myself today. Calling BRICS a manifestation of global multipolarity, Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia said that strengthening regional identity in the developing regions of the world does not mean that multipolarity is not happening in a global dimension. So in other words, returning sovereignty to the communities of the world does not mean that a rebalance of power is not happening at a global level. That's really what we're saying here. Now, what I find fascinating about this announcement planned in August is the location, right? Durban has one of the largest gold mines in the world. As a matter of fact, I think it might have the largest gold mine. We know that South Africa is a very rich, resource-rich nation, right? Has provided a lot of the resources, minerals, things of that nature, metals, ores, that have come out of the earth and entered into the, we'll say, just the valuable commodity space, the valuable currency space, really for quite a long time. But what's fascinating also to me is the history of Durban and how this ties into this concept of having relief brought to the peoples of the United States and the world, right? This spiritual freeing that we were just talking about a moment ago. So taken from Wikipedia, so take it how you will. Excuse me. Archaeological evidence from the Drakesberg Mountains suggests that the Durban area has been inhabited by communities of hunter-gatherers since 100,000 BC. These people lived throughout the area of KwaZulu-Natal until the expansion of the agro-pastoralists, so agricultural and livestock rearers and things like that from the north, saw their gradual incorporation. Oral history was passed down from generation to generation by the Zulu nation, who were inhabitants of the land before colonizers. But there is no written history of the area until it was cited by Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama. You should look him up as it pertains back to the 13 families of Portugal of old. The 13 families, one of whom was in the Portugal of old. There we are. Who sailed parallel to the KwaZulu-Natal coast at Christmas tide in 1497 while searching for a route from Europe to India. Vasco da Gama named the area Terra de Natal, or Christmas country in Portuguese. So in other words, this area not only has the largest or one of the largest gold mines in the world, it's also known historically as Christmas country in the West. So this BRICS summit that's coming up in August, I believe, is going to be a pivotal moment for the financial system of the world. We're going to see serious kinetic change that's going to affect things like trade and commerce. It's going to affect how economic value is distributed around the world. It's going to affect, I think, in limited fashion, some living conditions, especially in the Western nations that are still part of this Cabalist SWIFT system. We have to be ushered in towards the last, right? We have to be brought in more towards the end of this journey, because the rest of the world has to get untangled from the feelers and the tentacles and the arms of control, so that they can be free and assist with the subduing really of the beast. I think that's really what the point is in the financial space. Now, I'm not a financial advisor and I'm not a military strategy expert, but if I was trying to advance an agenda through this irregular war lens, this sort of allowing things to play out and then responding in the appropriate manner, that's how I would do it. So I'm just offering that as speculation, but it's not based without any sort of research. As we go through this process, we have, I think, a lot to look forward to, but a lot to wonder about. We have talked about being prepared for a while. We've talked about these events kicking off for a while, but now it seems that we're entering into those events. It's extremely exciting from my end. And I've got one last thing to show all of you before I let you go. I know that we've gone a little while today. This was a video that came across my TruthSocial. It was placed in the commentary. And I just want to share some of this with everyone. I appreciate this Patriot making this short little video and slapping it up on TikTok and the other information outlets out there, because I think that it really goes to highlight things to remember as we go through the rest of this process, right? It really goes to highlight that there are two worlds at play and we are winning and there are things to be excited about. We're going to do a screen share here. Just give me a moment. And I'm going to go ahead and get us going here.
Asked me about what my experience was like. President Trump said this type of law, basically, so I'd be there. No way than 11 makes sense. About 10 minutes. That we got my car, open my hood, everything in the tire everywhere. Back to the pretty all the outfits that are needed. So the little guy that I have lunch with, when I have lunch with people, so I'm gonna call your names out, and if I do, you come back to the back for about 25, 30 of us, maybe almost. Anyway, I call our names, went out back. There was 10 out there, and we stayed in that tent for a long time, and it got really hot, and I almost got sick, passed out, all this stuff. So senators and representatives and stuff, and their wives were so nice, you know. They helped me and I made sure I was okay. Took us out of the tent, lined us up again, put us back in the tent. Anyway, by the time he got there, we were ready to go in, and they were calling us in by name. And the girl stood up. She said, "Okay, I've got a few rules." She said, "If you have bags in your hand, bring them over here, lay them on the table. You know, you can't take them in." She said, "Also, do not shake his hand unless he initiates it. He likes to fist bump, and do not hug him or touch him." Okay. And she said, "You cannot take your phones in because we don't have time for, you know, selfies and stuff like that. Everybody selfies." So she said, "If you keep your phone in your pocket, if you take it out, Secret Service will take it, or I'll take it." Do that. She said, "We have the White House photographer in there, and she is phenomenal. So her pictures will be better than yours anyway." And and she said, "My last rule is, I want you guys to smile really big because you're getting ready to meet the President of the United States of America." We all cheered and stuff like that. So when you go in, he's standing kind of up on this little front behind him. His name's behind him on this little platform, and they announce to him who you are, your name, and what you are. Of course, I was with all these senators and mayors and all this other stuff. They all had names. And here with me, said my name and said I was a strong grassroots, you know, South Carolina activist. So as I stepped up, he immediately shook my hand. His eyes went straight to my shirt. He said, "Oh, well, I love that shirt. I love that shirt. Y'all look at that shirt. The shirt. Look at the shirt." My shirt said Trump 2023 on it. And if you know, you know. Anyway, she took our picture, and then I asked her, I said, "You need to get your hair up, Dick," because we all look like Melania. And he put his arm around me. He said, "Take another pig. Take a big, beautiful pig. Take the big, beautiful pig. Take it. Make it good. Make this one good." And she took another one. So I kind of leaned into him after that, and I said, "Boss, I'm tired. And I'm going to need to step back in." And leaned back toward me a little bit. He said, "I'm coming soon. I promise." It's okay. And I started walking out. He said, "You look great. You look great. I think you look great." I believe him because he's not a politician, you know. So anyway, that was my experience. He was so sweet to me. He was very just down to earth and act like he'd known you all his life. He's a really good guy. And he is my president, and he is your president. And those of you who are close to me, I've been telling you all this time, when you know, you know. Well, I pretty much just told you that you know. Bye.
If you know, you know. And there you have it, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'll be back with each of you again soon. I look forward to speaking with you. This is SGAnon. Thanks. Bye-bye.